It used to be there were two kinds of thinking. There was long-range planning, and then there was fire drills. And it was either we're going to be super intentional about long-range planning, or we're going to be really reactive to some crisis or whatever is happening today. Today, I think we have to apply the same principles of intentionality and long-range planning to 6 months and not think that that means everything's a fire drill. The danger of fire drill leadership is still very problematic, but 3 to 6 months is not a fire drill anymore. That's actually responsible planning. Welcome to At the Table, the podcast that lives at the intersection of teamwork, leadership, organizational health, and culture. I'm Pat Lencioni, your host with my co-host, Cody Thompson. What are we talking about today, Cody?
We're doing one called short-term strategy.
That's right. Short-term strategy, because usually we think about long-term strategy, and we want to talk about short-term strategy, which is really about the shrinking time horizon of planning. When I got out of college years ago, 10, 15 years ago, I think it's been now, I remember going to work at a management consulting firm, and we were helping companies coming up with their 10-year plan. Like, where do we see the company in 10 years? Let's start there and work our strategy backward from that. I started my firm about 8 years after that, and maybe 9 years. And then it was at most, we barely were talking about 5-year plans. Within a few years, we were down to 2 years.
Yeah.
Today, I don't know the last time I've talked to a company about more than 6 to 12 months. And frankly, it's usually closer to 6.
Yeah.
And it's a weird thing. And that's what we just want to talk about today, is explore this, is why and how our planning horizon has shrunk. And what to do about that. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? How do we adjust to that? But first, let's just talk about why has this happened? What do you think, Cody?
Well, I'm interested. I will say, I think you're kind of indulgent in this topic, because 12 years ago when I started the company, you've never, even when you were doing 10-year plans with companies, you were never interested in a 10-year plan, And when you wrote The Advantage more than 20 years ago, or 20-ish years ago, you told people to think about 6 to 9 month to 12 month sort of thematic goals. So I know you're sort of relishing in this idea that the whole world has sort of shrunken down to, for me, 10 years ago, to get you to talk about a 5-year plan was impossible, rightly so. And now you get to say, hey, the whole world moved in your direction, which is great. So you get to take a little victory lap that you've been right for a while.
Well, I do think too, when you think about it, as you were saying that, I was like, what was true about us? When you're a small company, things change big, fast.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between 1 year and the next or the next can be huge. And so the luxury of taking a 5-year plan, well, you don't know what your business is going to be in 2 years. And so we were always, very much realizing that things could change. But beyond that, something has happened in my lifetime, Cody. You're just a young man, but when I was a kid and I was riding my horse to work, I think that it is crazy to me to think about how fast things have changed. Companies come and go. Countries come and go so much faster than ever before. I think part of that is because of technology change. I think social change is happening quicker than it's ever happened. And I'm not exactly sure why, but I do know that very few organizations, maybe some of the really big ones, certainly government, but that's a different thing, can say, well, we're probably going to be around in 5 years. But very few organizations can be complacent enough to assume that things are going to be the same as they were just a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a few of the major topics. Obviously, one of the most obvious ones has got to be technology. I've heard somebody use an analogy, like if you look at a thick book of humanity, the iPhone is like the last page of that whole thick book. There's 800 or 900 or 1,000 pages before that, and technology only represents 2 to 3 pages of that entire book. So, and to think of that even in our own lifetime, the speed of that is incredible. So that's got to be one where the nature of that changes your business. It changes how you go to market with your business. It changes when the market changes and you have to change your strategy. So it used to be that you're a manufacturer, like the Model T is we're going to get a bunch of cars out there, let's build a factory. Let's put a conveyor belt together. Let's produce this many Model Ts and see what the demand is. And in today's world, so much is technology based that a competitor can come into that space right away, and you have almost no time to shift or transition.
Yeah. It's so funny. We get used to saying, Cody, and again, I'm hearing what you're saying, and you're provoking thoughts in my brain about technology. And people say, yeah, technology changed. But it's like, what is it about technology? We use that word. And I guess it's just literally the flow of knowledge and information is so fast today that literally when I started in business in, what was that, 1987, there was no internet.
Mm-hmm.
and certainly no cell phones. And so you could have an idea and knowledge that was protected, and you could actually keep a secret. And first mover advantage is something we talked about all the time when I was at Bain early on. Like, oh, you're the first one that has that. Nobody else is going to know. The nature of knowledge flow today is first mover advantages last for about 6 weeks now.
Mm-hmm.
Because somebody else is like, well, I can use your product. I can take it apart just by looking at it. It's technological. And I know what's going on. And so you can get put out of business very, very quickly. Unless you're in mining or steel or maybe an airline or something where there's massive capital requirements. Most of an information economy is based on things that can be swapped in very real time. So I think that has to do with it. I also think that this cell phone, I think about when when email became very common and we all did that. Gosh, I sound like I'm 95 years old, but people would still say, I haven't got back to my email yet. You know what I mean? I'll see it on Monday. I remember there was a thing like check your email once at night.
Yeah.
These phones mean every moment people are looking at their phone. They're looking at their phone. So innovation is happening. And you were just showing me this hilarious thing before we started this podcast, you and Matt, about that guy who's like, I have 3 days in a day. My first day is 6 to noon, then from noon to 6, and 6 to midnight. I do 3 days in a day. I'm going to kick your butt. That's so funny, but people actually work that way.
Mm-hmm.
So we're cycling through things that used to take years, literally in weeks. And so that means I don't think there's anything good or bad about this. I mean, it's just the reality of what it is. We have to start thinking in shorter term cycles.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think that you nailed it. I think it's information. It's not just the nature of technology. It's that the sharing of information is so much quicker and the access to the information is quicker, which gives us more adaptability in making decisions more quickly. Like for whether this is relevant to the podcast or not, I'm going to force it in here, which is yesterday, watched a YouTube video about the Catalan Atlas, which was like the highest form of maps that we've created in the 1500s, right? And it was like the known world in the 1500s, but it was the most intricate designed map. It was fascinating. I did it on company time, Pat. I watched a 12-minute video on this atlas. But what was fascinating to me is they have they had mapped the known world and they're using the best minds in the world to do this. But they were waiting for Marco Polo to get back from a adventure to tell them what this part of the world was like. What struck me was just how much had to go into them even knowing what was going on 20 miles away, 50 miles away, 100 miles away. And it was a whole journey, a whole crew had to put food on a boat and go there and then come back with information, and I, whether that's relevant or not to this podcast, I think it is in the sense that you can go look at Google Maps and look at what's going on right now.
Live.
A live time, or we think about how news travels and it used to be by horse or by boat or by mail. And now it's instantly after a event in a sports, game, you can watch it on Twitter or you can find the information, or something happens in business that affects the stock market immediately, in live time. That's never happened before.
Yeah. And you and I are big fans of that book, and you read it in college, and I remember my sister gave it to me because she used it in college, called "Amusing Ourselves to Death," which is how all this happened. Yeah. How we went from the slower communication to faster communication, but it became largely about entertainment. But getting back to planning in a business, I think there's something very interesting here. A point I want to make. I think it's going to be subtle. It used to be there were two kinds of thinking. There was long range planning, which was 10 years, 5 years, and then there was fire drills, which is just oh my gosh, what are we doing today? And it was either we're going to be super intentional about long range planning, or we're going to be really reactive to some crisis or whatever is happening today. Today, I think we have to apply the same principles of intentionality and long-range planning to 6 months and not think that that means everything's a fire drill. It's weird because every business, even the bad planners, they wake up every day and they go, what are we going to do? Oh my gosh. And they're urgent. We can't have that attitude. The danger of fire drill leadership is still very problematic, but 3 to 6 months is not a fire drill anymore. That's actually responsible planning.
And it's called sprints. Like there's a whole ecosystem around the idea that you sprint towards, whether it's development sprint or strategy sprint or whatever else it is, because you have to hey, here's what the right plan we've discerned we think is the right strategy right now. Let's move in that direction. Then let's lift our heads back up and go, what has changed? What has the world changed? Has the market changed? Has our ability to execute changed? And so it's sort of interesting because we're not saying one is better than the other. It's more of an observation about what's true. Now, I still love when I'm with clients or even for my own family, sometimes we talk about hey, what is the top of Everest? Where are we headed directionally? But then we're thinking about it from a base camp perspective, right?
Right.
Because if we get to base camp 1 and then the weather shifts, we should change our strategy.
Absolutely.
But in the past, it was that's kind of the only thing. What's the Everest, top of the mountain? And then we don't change as often as we would need to.
That's so interesting, Cody, because it used to be you would have a 10-year plan so you could envision what life in your company or anywhere would look like in 10 years. I think now that's been replaced by values and ideals. In other words, in life, it's I want to go to heaven. Long-term plan. The path to getting there is harder for me to even see. And I don't know where I'm going to live. I don't know what I'm going to be doing. I don't know what the situation is. And I have to be more versatile and nimble, but with that same thing in mind. And companies have to say, I know what our values are, and the first 2 questions are, why do we exist and how are we going to change the world? And what are our values? But we have to execute that in much shorter periods of time. So you're right. I like that. It's the base camp thing. It's all we can do is get to the next base camp. And if we're too worried about the top of Everest, if we're really thinking so much about that, we are probably not going to make it to base camp. It's so interesting. In the world of sports, it's this way too, Cody. Teams turn around in a year now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it used to be it would take a pro team or a college team 3, 5, 7 years to build their program. Now they actually can turn it around in a year with all the different things that are going on, and they can lose it in a year.
Yeah.
And it's such an interesting thing. There is just a lot less building over the long term, and it is just what it is. And I think that I probably liked it before better because there was a lot more patience and a little bit more breathing that went on. But today, to be competitive, you really do have to have a shorter time horizon.
It's not just sports. I think businesses go away overnight in a way that they never had before. And it's not there's just the hypervigilance. That's not what we're trying to say is stress harder because the times are changing faster. I think it speaks to some of our core stuff is know why you exist, know how you behave. I think one of the things that's sort of interesting in this whole conversation, Pat, is you wrote the book, Why Organizational Health Trumps Everything Else in Business. And you talk about it as the last untapped competitive advantage. Whereas before, first mover might have been an advantage.
Yeah.
Strategy might have been an advantage. Information, you might have had better information than your competitors. And so I think there is a resiliency to healthy organizations that I think is interesting. It gives you a little more breathing room. If you don't have the foundation of that organizational health, it can feel pretty stressful. Oh man, if we make the wrong decision tomorrow, it all could go away. And so building a little bit of a moat with organizational health, I think might be the answer.
I think you're right, because resiliency is what organizational health gives you. And organizations that could get out strategized in the short term, if you're healthy, you can survive. Your employees are going to stay. Your customers are going to be more loyal because they know what you believe in, and they will stay with you beyond one strategy cycle or sales cycle. But if you don't have a differentiated culture, and Jim Collins called those first two things, why do we exist and how do we behave, the core ideology. If your core ideology isn't sound, you can get wiped off the face of the earth that fast.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. You know what's interesting? One of the things that I didn't think about, but I think it's related to all this, is the idea of when I went into the workforce, my dad's generation, he worked at the same company for 40 years. And I was talking to somebody else about this. That was not uncommon. My generation was far shorter. I remember when I got to 5 years at a technology company, people were like, hey, you got something to think about here. If you stay any longer, you're not going to be marketable to the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. That was like, you're too long in that company and they're going to think, what's wrong with you that you didn't jump ship? Now, that was in the Bay Area and it was technology and all that kind of stuff. I don't think people have any qualms about staying someplace for 9 months or 15 months now, obviously. And so that cycles into it too. It's just individuals' time horizons for commitment are shorter as well. And I don't know which is the chicken and which is the egg, but I think it all goes together. And I think it's one of those things. It's really good to just go, this is how it works now. Let's embrace that.
I like that. It's about what's true. And if you're a leader living in a different reality than what's true, that guy's going to kick your butt. The guy who does 3 days in one day, he's going to kick your butt. So.
But I love the message that you said. I think the lesson from this is this. If you know why you exist and how you behave, you will get permission to survive changes in strategy that other organizations don't have, but be planning for the 3 to 6 month time horizon, and you'll probably be okay. That's it. All right. We like short podcasts. I like to listen to them. I like to do them. And I hope they're good for our listeners too. So Cody, thank you very much. Matt, behind the glass, thank you. And listeners, thank you for being supportive of us. We appreciate you. And we'll talk to you next time on At the Table. God bless.